Growing up in a cramped Brooklyn apartment, I, Ethan Carter, shared my childhood with my younger brother, Lucas. Our family wasn't rich, but we weren't poor either. Mom worked long hours as a nurse at NYU Langone, and Dad hauled packages for a logistics startup that thrived after the delivery boom of the early 2020s. From the outside, we were just another working-class New York family. But inside those thin plaster walls, Lucas was the golden child, Mom's pride and joy, while I was the afterthought. Lucas could do no wrong in her eyes. She'd call him her little prince, showering him with praise for every scribbled drawing or half-hearted effort at school. Me, I was the responsible one, which really just meant I got lectures about grades and chores, while Lucas got new sneakers or the last slice of pizza. It wasn't just favoritism, it was a shield she built around him, one I couldn't pierce no matter how loud I screamed. He knew it, too, and he used it like a weapon. Lucas wasn't just a brat, he was a bully. He'd mock me endlessly, my gangly frame, my chipped front tooth from a skateboarding wipeout in Prospect Park, the way my voice cracked when I got mad. "You look like a scarecrow got lost in Williamsburg," he'd say, cackling as I turned red. Words were his warm-up act. He'd swipe my stuffed comic books, my beat-up GameSphere controller, even the $20 I'd saved from shoveling snow off our stoop. Once, when I was 12 and he was 10, he snuck into my room with a lighter from Mom's kitchen drawer and tried to set my hair on fire while I slept. I woke up to the smell of singed strands and his giggling as he bolted out the door. I chased him, tackled him in the hall, and got a split lip for my trouble when he flailed back. Mom's response? "Boys will be boys." She ruffled his hair and sent me to clean up, like I'd started it. I'd run to Dad sometimes, hoping he'd see through the chaos. Back then, he was a neutral party, too tired from double shifts to pick sides. "Sort it out yourselves," he'd grunt, eyes glued to his phone, scrolling through X or whatever app had replaced it by 2025. He didn't want to rock the boat. Mom's temper was a storm none of us liked to face. But as the years dragged on, Lucas's stunts got harder to ignore. The stolen cash, the taunts, the lighter incident they piled up like trash on a subway platform. Dad started watching closer. One night, after Lucas borrowed my hoodie and returned it with cigarette burns, he'd picked up smoking from some punk kid in Flatbush, Dad cornered me in the kitchen. "He's pushing you too far, Ethan," he said, voice low so Mom wouldn't hear. "You're not a punching bag." He wasn't wrong, but I didn't know how to fight back, not yet. I was skinny, awkward, the kid who'd rather sketch buildings in a notebook than throw a punch. Lucas was shorter, but scrappy, with a mean streak that made up for it. That changed when I turned 15. Dad had been scrolling X one night, probably doom posting about drones, clogging the skyline, or the latest MTA fare hike, when he stumbled on a gym in Bed-Stuy advertising MMA classes for teens. "Self-defense," the ad said. "Build confidence." He didn't ask Mom, just signed me up the next day, paid the first month with cash he'd stashed from overtime. "You're not going to let him walk all over you forever," he told me, handing me a pair of second-hand gloves he'd snagged off some resale app. I didn't argue. The gym smelled like sweat and rubber mats, but it was mine, a slice of New York I didn't have to share with Lucas. Mom wasn't thrilled. "He doesn't need to fight," she snapped at Dad over dinner, stabbing her fork into a plate of takeout lo mein. "They're brothers. It's normal roughhousing." Dad just chewed his dumpling, eyes hard. "Roughhousing's one thing, bullying's another." She huffed and turned to Lucas, who smirked at me across the table like he'd won again. But something shifted that night. Dad saw me, really saw me, and for the first time, I had an ally. Lucas didn't know it yet, but the rules were about to change. The MMA classes changed me. At 15, I walked into that Bed-Stuy gym, a lanky kid who flinched at loud noises. By 17, I was leaner, stronger, and done taking crap. The mats taught me more than just how to throw a punch, they gave me a spine. Lucas didn't see it coming. He'd gotten bolder over the years, his taunts sharper, his stunts meaner. Mom still waved it off, calling it sibling rivalry, but Dad's quiet support kept me going. I'd catch him nodding at me sometimes, pride flickering in his tired eyes when I'd come home sweaty from sparring, knuckles bruised, but head high. The breaking point hit one muggy August night in 2025. I'd been saving up for a new tablet, $150 scraped together from odd jobs, stashed in an old sneaker box under my bed. I came home from the gym, dumped my bag, and went to check it. Gone. The box was empty, just a crumpled receipt from some bodega in Bushwick lying where my cash should have been. Lucas was sprawled on the couch, scrolling X on his phone, a fresh vape pen dangling from his lips, some overpriced model he couldn't afford on his own. I didn't ask. I knew. "Give it back," I said, voice flat, standing over him. He didn't even look up, just smirked. "Give what back, Scarecrow?" "You lose something." That was it. 2 years of jabs and grappling drills kicked in. I grabbed his shirt, yanked him off the couch, and when he swung at me, I ducked, hooked his leg, and slammed him to the floor. He hit the rug hard, air whooshing out of him. I pinned him, knee on his chest, and snarled, "The money, now." His eyes went wide, first time I'd ever seen him scared. He wheezed out a laugh, trying to play it off, but I didn't budge. Finally, he fumbled in his pocket and tossed a wad of crumpled bills at me. Not all of it, maybe $80, but it was enough. Mum freaked when she walked in, takeout bags still in hand. "Ethan, what the hell are you doing?" she yelled, dropping everything to pull me off. Lucas scrambled up, coughing, already spinning his story. "He's crazy, Mom. I didn't do anything." She bought it, of course, started fussing over him like he'd been mugged in Times Square. Dad, though, just stood in the doorway, arms crossed. He didn't say a word, but the look he gave me said I'd done what I had to. After that, Lucas kept his distance. No more sneaking into my room, no more swiping my stuff. He'd still mouth off, though couldn't resist. "Think you're tough now, huh?" he'd mutter when Mum wasn't around, or "MMA won't fix that face." I ignored it. The gym had taught me control. I didn't need to prove anything anymore, but the apartment felt smaller every day, like the walls were closing in. Lucas's presence was a low hum of static I couldn't tune out, and Mum's blind favoritism made it worse. I started counting the months till I could leave. Senior year, I busted my ass at school. Not because I loved it, half my teachers were checked out, phoning it in over glitchy hollow screens, but because it was my ticket out. I aced the SATs, applied for every scholarship I could find, and landed a full ride to New York University. Engineering, a chance to build something, not just break stuff down. The day I got the acceptance email, Dad clapped me on the shoulder, a rare grin splitting his face. "You earned this, Ethan." Mum just nodded. Tight-lipped, probably mad, I'd be leaving Lucas behind. Lucas didn't say a word, just glared at me over his vape, like I'd betrayed him by daring to succeed. Move-in day was a liberation. I hauled my duffel bag to a dorm in Greenwich Village, the city buzzing around me, hover drones whirring overhead, subway rattling below. No more tiptoeing around Lucas's tantrums or Mum's excuses. I could breathe. Lucas stayed back in Brooklyn, still coasting on Mum's coddling, picking up shifts at some vape shop in Flatbush when he felt like it. We barely talked after I left. He'd post smug ex-updates pics of him flexing in a mirror or partying with sketchy dudes from the neighborhood, but never acknowledged me, not even a congrats. Fine by me. I was done chasing his approval, or anyone's. New York was big enough for both of us, as long as he stayed on his side of it. College was my reset button. NYU threw me into a whirlwind of late nights, caffeine-fueled study sessions, and a city that never slowed down. I was still the quiet kid from Brooklyn, but engineering gave me a lane, something I could control, piece by piece. That's where I met Sarah. She was in my intro to circuits class, a wiry girl from Queens with a sharp laugh and a habit of doodling schematics on her tablet during lectures. We clicked over a group project, trading sarcastic ex-posts about our professor's drone obsession. By sophomore year, we were dating nothing flashy, just pizza runs in the East Village and walks along the Hudson when we could steal time. Things moved fast junior year. Sarah got pregnant. We were 20, scared out of our minds, but she wanted to keep it. "We'll figure it out," she said, eyes fierce, and I believed her. I proposed in our dorm's cramped lounge, no ring, just a promise. We got married at City Hall a month later, her in a thrifted dress, me in my least wrinkled shirt. Dad showed up, gave me a stiff hug, and slipped us $500 he couldn't really spare. Mum sent a text, "Congrats, be careful," and Lucas didn't bother responding to the invite. No surprise there. Our son, Henry, came screaming into the world in late 2026 at Mount Sinai, tiny, red-faced with Sarah's dark hair. I'd hold him in our shoebox apartment in Alphabet City, watching his chest rise and fall, thinking he was mine, my family, my shot at something better than the mess I'd grown up in. Sarah dropped out to care for him, picking up freelance coding gigs when she could. I juggled classes and a part-time job at a 3D printing lab, dreaming of the day I'd graduate and land us something stable. For a while, it worked. We weren't perfect, money was tight, fights were loud, but Henry kept us anchored. The cracks showed up slow. Sarah got distant, spending hours on her phone, claiming it was client stuff. I'd catch her smiling at texts she wouldn't show me, brushing it off when I asked. I didn't push too tired, too trusting. Then, 2 years after graduation, with me grinding at an entry-level gig designing transit drones, she dropped the bomb. We were arguing about bills in our kitchen, Henry asleep in the next room, when she blurted it, "I've been sleeping with someone else." My stomach sank. "Who?" I demanded, voice shaking. She looked away, then said it. "Lucas." It wasn't just once. She confessed to years of it hookups, stretching back to college. A full-on affair, while I was pulling all-nighters for finals. Lucas, my smirking, vape-sucking brother, had been slinking around my life, taking what wasn't his again. The worst part? Henry. "He might not be yours," Sarah whispered, tears streaking her face. She'd slept with Lucas around the time Henry was conceived, too reckless or too cruel to care about the math. I stared at her, the woman I'd built my world around, and felt it collapse. I didn't yell, didn't break anything, just grabbed my keys and walked out into the rainy New York night, the city's hum swallowing my steps. Next day, I bought a DNA kit from some biotech kiosk in Midtown, $99. Same-day results, the kind of tech you only get in 2025. Swabbed Henry's cheek while he giggled, oblivious, and sent it off. The email pinged 12 hours later. 99.9% match to Lucas. Not me. Henry wasn't my son. He was my nephew. Divorce was quick. Sarah didn't fight it guilt or indifference. I couldn't tell. I gave her the apartment, the furniture, whatever she wanted. I just needed out. Henry's face. Lucas's face haunted me every time I looked at him. I moved into a shitty studio in the Bronx, cutting ties with Sarah completely. No calls, no visits. Henry was hers now. Theirs. I blocked her on everything. Deleted years of photos from my cloud. Lucas, I didn't even bother confronting, not yet. He'd get his reckoning later. For now, I was a ghost, drifting through a city that didn't care, trying to scrape myself back together. The betrayal wasn't just Sarah's. It was Lucas's too. A knife he'd been sharpening since we were kids finally plunged deep. The truth burned in me like a live wire. I couldn't keep it buried, not after Sarah's confession and that cold DNA result staring back from my phone. Lucas had crossed a line no brother should, and I wasn't about to let it fester in silence. I needed Dad to know, needed Mom to see the little prince for what he was. So, a week after I moved into my Bronx studio walls, thin enough to hear the neighbors' arguments, I called them. Not Lucas, not yet. I wanted them to hear it from me first. Dad picked up, voice gruff over the line. "Ethan, you okay?" I could hear Mom in the background, fussing about something, probably dinner or the latest X-drama she'd gotten hooked on. I didn't waste time. "Put it on speaker," I said. He did. I laid it out. Sarah's cheating, Lucas's betrayal, Henry being his kid, not mine, the divorce, all of it. Mom gasped halfway through, a sharp no cutting me off, but Dad growled at her to let me finish. When I stopped, the line went dead quiet. Then Dad said, "That little bastard," low and furious, like he'd been waiting for Lucas to screw up this bad. Mom started babbling. "There's got to be a mistake, Lucas wouldn't." But I hung up. I'd said my piece. They didn't let it drop. Dad called back the next day, insisted on a family sit-down. Not in person, Mom's knees were shot from years on her feet, and Dad hated the subway since the fare hit $5. So we did it over holo call, the kind you get cheap from those pop-up tech vendors in Chinatown. I logged in from my studio, Dad and Mom flickering into view from their Brooklyn living room. Lucas joined late, his face popping up on the screen. That same smug smirk I'd hated since we were kids. He was in some dingy room, probably his Flatbush crash pad, vape cloud, curling around him like he didn't have a care in the world. Dad didn't mince words. "Ethan told us everything. You got anything to say, Lucas?" Mom jumped in, voice shrill. "Let's not rush to judge." But Dad cut her off with a look I'd never seen. Pure steel. Lucas shrugged, leaning back. "Yeah, I slept with Sarah. So what? She came on to me." He grinned, like it was a game he'd won. I clenched my fists off camera, nails digging into my palms. Dad pressed him. "And Henry? Your own nephew?" Lucas didn't flinch. "Guess he's mine now. Not my fault Ethan couldn't keep her happy." That did it. Dad exploded, years of pent-up frustration pouring out. "You're a disgrace," he roared, face red even through the holo glitch. "You don't get to ruin your brother's life and act like it's nothing." Mom tried to interrupt. "He's still your son." But Dad wasn't hearing it. He'd caught Lucas's confession. Every word, and it flipped a switch. I stayed quiet, watching it unfold, feeling a grim satisfaction as Lucas's smirk faltered. Dad laid down the hammer after that call. Lucas had been coasting on their dime rent money, a stipend for some half-assed community college courses he barely attended. Dad cut it all off. "You're 25, he told him in a follow-up text I saw later. "You want to play dirty? Pay for it yourself." Lucas had been banking on that cash. Without it, he was scrambling. I heard through a cousin he'd started begging buddies for loans, but his charm didn't stretch far in Flatbush. Mom was a mess over it. She called me, crying, begging me to talk sense into Dad. "He's too hard on Lucas," she said, voice thick with tears. "He's just a boy. A boy who'd slept with my wife and fathered my kid," I thought, but didn't say. I told her I was done with Lucas, done with her excuses. She hung up sobbing. Dad, though, stuck to his guns. "She'll come around," he told me later, voice firm, "or she won't. But I'm not letting him drag us all down." For the first time, I saw him as more than the tired delivery guy. He was a wall. Unyielding Lucas didn't reach out to me, not then. I figured he was too proud or too stupid to realize how deep he'd sunk. The family was fracturing, Mom clinging to her denial, Dad drawing a line, me on the outside looking in. But I wasn't broken anymore. Lucas had tried to bury me, and I'd clawed my way out. He'd learned soon enough that actions had weight, even in a city that forgets you fast. The fallout with Lucas didn't just split the family, it rewrote the future. Dad wasn't one for grand gestures, but after that hollow call, he went quiet in a way that meant he was planning something big. A month later, he called me from Brooklyn, voice steady but heavy. "Ethan, come over. We need to talk." I took the 4 train down from the Bronx, the car rattling through a city, humming with drones and late fall chill. When I got to their apartment, Mum was in the kitchen, silent for once, stirring a pot of soup she didn't look at. Dad sat me down at the scratched-up table we'd had since I was a kid and slid a tablet across to me. It was his will, freshly updated. He'd gone to some legal bot service in downtown Brooklyn, cheap, fast, the kind that scans your ID and spits out documents in an hour. "Read it," he said. I did. The numbers hit me first. Nearly $2 million, scraped together from years of overtime, a small inheritance from his mom, and a lucky crypto payout he'd cashed out before the 2024 crash. All of it, every cent, was left to me. Lucas's name was there too, but next to it, $1. $1. A middle finger in legalese. "You deserve it," Dad said, eyes locked on mine. "He doesn't." I didn't argue. Part of me wanted to $2 million was a fortune, more than I'd ever imagined touching. But the bigger part knew he was right. Lucas had torched every bridge, and I'd been the one picking up the pieces. Mum overheard from the kitchen and dropped her spoon, metal clanging on the counter. "You can't do this," she snapped, storming in. "He's your son too." Dad didn't flinch. He stopped being my son when he stabbed Ethan in the back. She glared at me like I'd orchestrated it, then at Dad, but he just pointed at the door. "Take it up with Lucas." She didn't. Not directly, but Lucas found out fast, probably through some ex-post she'd vague tweeted. In a fit of guilt, 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed with his number. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity won. "Ethan," he started, voice rough, no smirk this time. "I need help." He was broke. Sarah had lawyered up, demanding child support for Henry. And without Dad's cash, he'd had to drop his classes. Rent was due, his vape shop gig barely covered food, and his Flatbush buddies had ghosted him. "Talk to Dad," he begged. "Get him to change it back." I let him ramble, picturing him in that grimy room, desperation seeping through the line. Then I said, "No," and hung up. He'd made his bed, let him lie in it. He tried again a few days later, texting me sob stories about Henry needing clothes, Sarah threatening to kick him out. I blocked him. Dad heard about it from Mom, who'd been whining to him non-stop, and he just shrugged. "Kids gotta learn," he told me over coffee at a bodega near their place. You don't get to wreck a family and walk away clean. Mom kept pushing, though called me once, voice shaky, saying Lucas was in a bad place. I told her he'd put himself there and stopped taking her calls too. She'd picked her side long ago. Lucas's spiral picked up speed. Word trickled back through cousins still on X. He'd moved in with Sarah and Henry in some cramped Queens rental, scraping by on odd jobs, delivering takeout on a busted e-bike, hawking knockoff tech at flea markets. The golden child was gone, replaced by a guy nobody wanted to touch. Dad didn't gloat, but I caught a grim nod when I mentioned it. Actions have consequences, he said, sipping his coffee, even in New York. I didn't feel sorry for Lucas, not after everything. That $1 in the will wasn't just Dad's judgment, it was mine too. I'd spent years under his thumb, then more rebuilding from his betrayal. Now, he was the one drowning, and I wasn't throwing him a rope. The money sat there, a promise of something better, but I didn't touch. It didn't need to yet. It was enough to know it was mine, a lifeline Lucas couldn't steal. For once, the scales had tipped, and I wasn't the one falling. By late 2025, the dust had settled, or at least stopped choking me. I'd carved out a rhythm in the Bronx, a life that didn't revolve around Lucas or Sarah or the wreckage they'd left. My job at the transit drone firm paid off, literally. A promotion came through in November, bumping me up to lead designer on a city contract to overhaul MTA's delivery bots. More money, more hours, but it was mine. No shadows from Brooklyn creeping in. I started therapy too. Some virtual gig through an app, $50 a session. Cheaper than the in-person shrinks clogging Manhattan. The guy on the screen didn't fix me, but he helped me unpack the mess. The bullying, the betrayal, the years I'd spent feeling less than. I wasn't healed, not yet, but I was moving. Dad became my anchor. We'd meet up every couple weeks, grabbing bodega coffee or splitting a plate of dumplings in Sunset Park. He'd ask about work, nod at my sketches of drone frames, tell me he was proud words I hadn't heard much growing up. Mom's absence hung between us, unspoken. She'd stopped talking to Lucas. After a blowout with Dad, he'd threatened to leave her if she kept funneling cash to him behind his back. She chose Dad, but it cost her. Last I heard, she was rattling around their apartment, glued to X, posting cryptic quotes about family loyalty. I didn't reach out. She'd made her bed too. Lucas and Sarah were their own disaster. They'd shacked up in that Queens rental, a fourth-floor walk-up, with peeling paint and a busted heater, according to a cousin who'd driven by. Henry was growing fast, a toddler now, and Sarah was still squeezing Lucas for every dime he didn't have. He'd bounced from gig to gig e-bike deliveries, a stint at a vape warehouse that fired him for showing up high, even busking with a cracked guitar in Union Square until the cops chased him off. Ex-posts from mutuals painted the picture. Lucas gaunt, unshaven, whining about deadbeat dads getting a raw deal. Sarah wasn't much better. Her freelance coding had dried up, and she was leaning on food pantries to keep Henry fed. They were stuck, a sinking ship neither could steer. The family cut them off clean. Cousins unfollowed Lucas online. Aunts stopped asking about him at gatherings. Dad's will had drawn a line. Nobody crossed $2 million for me, $1 for Lucas, and a message that echoed louder than words. I didn't flaunt it, didn't need to. The money sat in a trust, accruing interest, a safety net I hadn't touched. Therapy taught me it wasn't about the cash, it was about the choice. Dad had picked me, and for once, I wasn't the afterthought. I saw Lucas once by chance, in early December. I was grabbing a sandwich at a deli near Penn Station when he shuffled in hood up, eyes sunken, hands stuffed in a ripped jacket. He didn't see me at first, just ordered a coffee with a fistful of change. He counted twice. Then he turned, and our eyes locked. No smirk this time, just a flicker of something, maybe shame, maybe nothing. "Ethan," he muttered, voice raspy. I nodded, said nothing, paid for my food, and left. He didn't follow, didn't beg. Whatever he'd wanted to say died in his throat, and I didn't care enough to dig it out. New York kept spinning. Drones buzzed overhead, the subway groaned below, and I kept building drones. A career, a life. I wasn't ready for dating. Sarah's knife still stung too deep, but I wasn't lonely either. Friends from work dragged me to bars in Bushwick, and I'd sketch ideas on napkins while they debated the latest X trends. The city didn't care about my scars, and that was freedom. Lucas and Sarah could drown in Queens, Mom could stew in Brooklyn. I had Dad, my job, and a quiet corner of the Bronx, where the past didn't knock. The story wasn't over, not really, but it was mine now. Lucas's betrayal had cracked me open, but I'd patched the breaks with something stronger. Dad's will wasn't just money, it was proof I'd survived. I'd outlasted the golden child, the wife who'd lied, the family that had looked away, and in a city of 8 million, I'd found a space to stand.